This show is listener supported. You can join us and help our show grow to support more adoptees by going to adopteeson.com/partner. You're listening to Adoptees On, the podcast where adoptees discuss the adoption experience. This is episode 114, Inez. I'm your host, Haley Radke. I'm so honored to bring you Inez Cook today, who is the owner of a First Nations restaurant in Vancouver called Salmon and Bannock. Inez shares her story with us, how she spent time searching for identity all around the world, and how she came to find it back in Canada. We discuss finding out about the 60 Scoop as an adult, the power and importance of food as a way to explore her culture, and how her new book will be available to educate children across Canada about the 60 Scoop. We do mention bannock a few times, and I just want to tell you that that is the name for a traditional Indigenous bread, and it's delicious. We wrap up with some recommended resources, and as always, links to everything we'll be mentioning today are on the website adopteeson.com. Let's listen in. I'm so pleased to welcome to Adoptees On, Inez Cook. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'm just really excited to hear your story. So would you start out with that? Would you share your story with us?
My name is Inez Cook, and I am part of the 60 Scoop. I was born in Bella Coola, British Columbia, part of the Newhook Nation, and I was taken away at age 1. I was put into foster care, and I'm one of the fortunate ones. I ended up in a home where this family, they had 8 children of their own, and I was the 23rd foster child that they'd brought in. And, at the time when they brought me, they said, "Can you just bring her to her health?" And they said, "No, we're full. We don't have any space. We can't do it anymore. And we're getting older, and we grow to love these kids. And then they get adopted out, and we can't handle it anymore." And they said, "Please just bring her to her health." So they brought me in, and I was the last foster child that they brought in to this home. And I stayed with them for 2 years, and then they tried to adopt me. And the government said they were too old to adopt me. So their daughter adopted me. So they became my grandparents, and their daughter became my mother. So I was really lucky in the fact that I really grew up in, a family and surrounding of love, which was great. And the people that were my siblings for the first 2 years ended up being my aunts and uncle. And my mother. And so that was really, really cool. It kept us all really close, so my story is a little different than others. I recognize that not everybody has had such a good beginning, I guess, like a good situation out of a bad situation, I guess you can say. I mean, of course, we all have personal stories that we've gone through, and nothing's been perfect, but I have to say that I was given, a family of love, and I grew up knowing that I was adopted. I didn't know the situation about why I was adopted or anything like that. And I kind of made up a story in my head, which I found out later wasn't true, obviously, but I really, I was a dreamer, and I liked making up stories, and I was always writing plays when I was little, and I loved making up stories about what really happened and why I was adopted. And growing up, I was always told I was the chosen one. I was always told that all the other parents had to keep what they had, and we got to choose you. So they always made me feel really special, which was, it's very appreciated, especially now looking back and hearing other people's stories and hearing other people's experiences. I really respect and value that I had that core. I knew that I was Native, and when I was little, we moved up my dad got positioned at a job in Northwest Territories in Hay River. And I was in grade 2, and we moved up there, and, I saw drunk people in the ditch. I saw a lot of, broken souls and scary people in my eyes as a little young girl. And I was like, "Who are these people?" And they said they're natives. And I just looked at them and I said, "I'm not native." And that was the end of it. And nobody was allowed to call me native ever. And, growing up, I used to try to fool people because my name is Inez and I look like I could be Latina. I actually tried studying some Spanish, trying to fool people, trying to pretend that I was Spanish. My documents said that I was part Italian, so I really worked that because of my Mediterranean coloring. I used to say I was Italian. I really hid away from myself, and I didn't want to know about my native heritage. I didn't want to belong to it. But the interesting thing is that my whole life I felt different. And even though I was in this great family filled with love, I felt like I still was different than everybody else. And it was more than just looking at the family photos where everybody's blonde and fair complexion and I'm the dark one. It was more than that. I just felt like I was yearning for culture. And I felt like these mountains in Vancouver were stagnating me and I needed to jump higher and I needed to find culture. And so when I was 19, I guess I just must have turned 19. I just finished studied radio broadcasting and I studied radio broadcasting in Vancouver. And I thought I would move to Toronto and go work for Much Music.
Mhm.
And, I thought that was just going to be easy and that was my calling. And I got there and I didn't have any experience. I was fresh out of school. So I said, well, I would work as an intern for free. And they said that it was unionized and there was no free positions to be had. So, the school of life came up. It was expensive, 1988 in Toronto, very expensive. And I had to have 3 jobs just to pay my rent. And then I ended up moving to Montreal and I studied French in Montreal. And the interesting thing is the reason I decided to move to Montreal and study French was because I had had a job interview with Wardair in 1988 in Toronto. And they said, I got through my 3 interviews and they said, you know what? We would love to hire you, but the other applicant speaks French. And we know that wasn't a prerequisite, but it is definitely an asset and we're going to have to take them. And they said, is there anything that you'd like to say? And I looked them straight in the eye and I said, this will be the last time anybody tells me that that is going to be a reason that I don't get a job. So I moved to Montreal and I studied French. And, I was still looking for culture and still yearning for this. I needed to meet the world and I needed the world to meet me. And it was a strange thing, but also backing it up a little bit, when I was 13, my first job was at Boston Pizza as a dishwasher. And it's hilarious because when I finished my radio broadcasting course, my best friend finished her university, her teaching course, and we went out to celebrate. And I looked at her and I said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And she just finished her teaching course. And she said, I want to be a makeup artist in film. And she just finished her teaching course. And I just finished my broadcasting and I said, I want to be a flight attendant and own my own restaurant. And that was something that we said to each other, when we were 18.
Wow.
So I had kept my toes wet my whole life working in restaurants. When I was in Toronto, I worked at 3 restaurants just to pay my bills. I was part of a team that opened up a 5-star restaurant. I was new to Toronto. I wanted to make friends. I thought I should go and work at a place where there's a lot of people and I can meet lots of people and build like a little family and get in right away. So that's what I did in Toronto with my 3 jobs, was all in restaurants. Then I moved to Montreal and I had to work, under the table because I was getting my French classes paid by the government, 40 hours a week, 5 days a week French. And I needed to pay my bills, so I was working under the table in restaurants. And, so I kept my toes wet the whole time in the industry. And then, one day there was this tiny little ad saying flight attendants urgently needed. Please call this number. Well, I called the number all day and it was busy. I couldn't get through. And at that time, we used to be able to call the operator and do like a cross check with the number and get the address. So I showed up at the address at this place like a stalker. And I said, hi, I'd like to apply for the flight attendant position. And they said, how did you find us? I'm like, well, I have to go to work now and I've been trying to call you all day and it's been busy and I need to reach somebody. They said, well, do you have a resume? And I said, I'll provide you with my resume when you provide me with an interview. And so they gave me an interview, set a date, and I went off to work. And then I started flying. So that was, 1989. I started flying for Nation Air out of Montreal, and they went bankrupt. 90, no, that was 1990. So 93, they went bankrupt. And when they went bankrupt, we had a contract in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, and a European airline took over the contract and hired 23 of us Canadians who are now at the time jobless. So I went and I worked with this European airline, and I was based in Saudi Arabia, Africa, India, all over the world. And the entire time I was still yearning for culture. And living in the Middle East, I lived there for 5.5 years. And, I can manage in Arabic now, shopping, taxis, restaurants. I love the food. I love the music. I had all my heartbreaks were there.
Mm.
I tried to even pretend I was like Middle Eastern of some sort. Like I really felt like I belonged, but I didn't. I didn't belong. At the end of the day, I just didn't. And when I quit flying overseas, I got hired with Air Canada back in Vancouver. And my mom was ill, and it was time for me to come home. And it had been the first time in a long time that Air Canada was hiring French speakers. As I came home for Christmas, I did my Air Canada interviews, and I moved back home. And just before I left, my friends over in Saudi Arabia, they threw a big party for me. And because my dream was to still open the restaurant, but I thought it was going to be my retirement goal. I thought, and my dream was to take people on a journey. And I wanted to take people, I wanted them to feel like they've traveled and they've been on this journey. And because I've traveled and I've seen the world, and I really, really, really wanted people to experience traveling and a different experience and all of those things. And I started flying with Air Canada, and I started to meet lots of like Indigenous colleagues, and these people were amazing. They were role models. So I used to ask them questions, and I started asking little questions here and there, and just trying to understand, a little bit more about, and they were proud. They were so proud to be Indigenous, proud to be First Nations. And I thought, wow, that's just incredible. That's amazing. And it was after I came back and after I actually got my status back, I got it reinstated. And there had been a bill that had passed because through the 60 scoop, our families had to sign away our status. And so I grew up without status, and I got it back as an adult. But I got it back after I started flying for Air Canada. And so I never ticked off the box like visible minority. They said, "Are you visible minority?" And I thought, that's the most ridiculous question I've ever heard.
Hmm.
I don't feel like a visible minority, and I don't even know what that really is, actually. So I answered no. And it wasn't until a couple years after I'd been flying that at the time, National Chief Phil Fontaine was the national chief.
Mm.
And he was on my flight, and I said, "Oh, what are you doing in Vancouver?" And he said, "Well, I actually have a meeting with Air Canada. I need to make sure that they've hired enough. There's a quota. They have to hire X amount of Indigenous people." I was like, "Really? I didn't know about that. Well, I guess I'll put my name on the list." And that was kind of the beginning when I started to kind of understand that I actually am Indigenous. And once I got my status back, I could look at the picture and kind of go, okay, like this is weird, but
Mm.
I didn't feel Indigenous.
Because you had decided in grade 2, you're like, you said, you wrote this line in your book. I knew I was Native, but I did not want to be.
I did not want to be. And I didn't want anybody to know either. That was like really important to me.
Mm.
So when I started asking questions to my colleagues, and, one of the colleagues in my initial training at Air Canada, she's Native. And I was like, "Oh my God, do you make bannock?" And she's like, "Oh, my mom does sometimes." I was like, "Oh, you have to give me a recipe." And I started to get interested in like just little things, and little things that I remembered when I was little. They started to come back to me, and I started to have like a larger interest. Okay, then I get married, I get divorced. When I'm going through my divorce, I need a little getaway. I need to just get out of the city and just kind of clear my thoughts. And one of my best friends lives in Kelowna, so I go hang out with her and drink some wine and just chill. And she's driving me back to the airport, and I see a big sign, "Don't panic, we have bannock." And I'm like, oh my God, stop the car. I need to go there now. And so we stopped and we went and got Bannock, and I brought a bunch of it back, and I told, my close friend Remy, the Olympics are coming to Vancouver, and we don't have an Indigenous restaurant in the city anymore. Like, it's ridiculous. There's one in Kelowna and there's nothing in Vancouver, and the entire world is coming here. And we no longer have anything Indigenous, like a restaurant that they can go to. Like, when I travel the world, I like to try food from the land. I like to try local food. So I just thought that was really odd. And he's like, oh my God, I'll work day and night. Let's make it happen. And I said, I'm going through my divorce. I don't have money. It's not the right time. Anyways, things ended up kind of, doors started opening. And this lady that we knew basically needed us to sublet her restaurant, like her daughter's restaurant. I was like, how's your daughter doing? You didn't hear? She had a car accident. She can't run her restaurant anymore. I wish somebody would take it over. So basically, it was kind of like, what? All the doors kind of opened, and we just dove in. And we opened Salmon and Bannock Bistro February 15th, 2010, the day after the Olympics started. And it was interesting because I wanted it authentic, and I still didn't feel that native, and I didn't feel that authentic. And so I went to a local community here and I asked who makes the best bannock. And I hired a mother and daughter team, and we started super small with about 5 items on the menu. And now, I mean, we've grown, our menu's grown, our staff has grown. And it's funny because I thought that after, opening this restaurant, all the communities would welcome us with open arms. And that wasn't the case at all, because I was a stranger. I was like an alien. Nobody knew me. And in the Indigenous communities, in the Indigenous world, especially the business world, you hear of a business opening up, you would have heard of them, or you would have heard about them, or you would have known someone in their family, or you would have known something about them. But to see all over the media that a New Hulk person had opened this restaurant, it caused a lot of alert and questions, and especially in the New Hulk community. They're like, who's claiming to be New Hulk and we don't know them? Like, that's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent in people to check it out. And I guess the first people that came to check it out saw me and met me and went back and reported back saying, like, I don't think that she's lying. She looks New Hulk. So then they had to send in somebody older to check. And, it's funny because Remy's French and I'm First Nations, and he used to get a lot of grief from, a lot of people, like, why are you a white person working at this Native restaurant? And so I said, well, you know what? I'm getting the same grief from the same people because nobody knows me. So it was interesting because this lady had come in and she was, asking me a ton of questions, and I knew a couple of answers, and thankfully I knew my biological mother's name was Miriam. I went and got the lady her tea, and when I came back and I brought her tea, she was standing there with her arms extended saying, let me be the first to welcome you home. We're family. And when that happened, that was really, really, really the beginning of, like an onion, peeling back the layers of understanding who I am, where I come from, my history, my biological mother's story. And, after that, several relatives came in to meet me. An uncle had come in to meet me, and he had promised my late biological mother that he would find me. And when he found me, he did a traditional blessing for the restaurant. And he looked at me and he said, your traditional name is going to be Sneetsmana. And he went back and reported to the community that that's what was going to happen. And he passed away shortly after. So I was really fortunate that I had that moment with him, that special moment with him.
So what does that mean for you then to have this? Oh my goodness, there is a whole other family. And you had said that in your childhood you'd fantasized a little bit, but none of that was true or accurate. So in your adulthood then, knowing you have this other family and you do have this heritage, what was going on for you when you're discovering this?
So I have a biological sister. We also met as adults, and I said, well, if I'm going up there, you're coming with me. I'm not doing this one alone. And we went up together, and it was a 3-day potlatch. We met 500 relatives, and it was like extremely emotional. It still is emotional, actually, but it was overwhelming because there was two of us and 500 of them.
Hmm. Was
And
your sister taken in the scoop as well
yes,
and adopted into a different family?
yes, and she grew up in North Van.
Hmm.
Yeah, so it was definitely eye opening, and basically just the beginning of really understanding and going to Bella Coola and meeting family, and just understanding. I've I've been fortunate enough. I've been back 3 times now, and I've been, building relationships with relatives and learning more of the story, which is great, and it's helped me immensely. And the cool thing is that now I realize that this restaurant is actually, it's a personal journey that I'm taking everybody on. And I'm not taking anybody traveling far. I'm taking them traveling within and inwards in my personal journey. And that's what makes Salmon Bannock so special.
So as you reconnect with your sister and you find out, some of the things that were actually true about your past that you just couldn't have known since you were so young, and you learned about the 60s scoop, what was that like for you, knowing what was taken from you?
I think, well, when my sister phoned me and she said there's a class action lawsuit for the 60 scoop, and you should fill out the forms. And at first I was like, no, I'm not going to. That's just for the people that had a rough go and I had a good life, and I'm not going to fill out the forms. And furthermore, I don't want to throw my family under the bus. And then I thought about it, and I thought, no, do you know what? Like, thank goodness I had a good life, but it's not about that. It's the domino effect of what happened prior, which was wrong. And there's strength in numbers. So most definitely I have to sign that paper. So that's kind of where my thoughts were.
And do you know how many other children were taken from Bella Coola?
No, I never asked, actually.
Mm. I wondered, I was, picturing you going back and meeting these 500 relatives and you and your sister and wondering how many other people were impacted by losing their connection to their children. And yeah.
I mean, our biological mother, she was fluent in the New Hulk language, and when she was at the day residential school, the residential day school in Bella Coola, she spoke her language, and they poured boiling hot water on her until she had third-degree burns, and she was hospitalized for 3 months. And the family would visit her daily, and the government went and said, oh no, this is too much family involvement. So they uprooted her from the hospital, and they transferred her to the residential school in Alert Bay. So she never got to grow up being a daughter, a sister. She never had a mother-daughter relationship with her own mother. She didn't get to grow up with her family. And, it was interesting because I'd heard, different stories about how broken she was once I started meeting relatives, and about as soon as they found me, about 100 Facebook requests came up on my Facebook feed from family in Bella Coola. And I thought, how on earth could she have been so broken with such a large family? I just couldn't understand it, and I couldn't wrap my head around it, because you can only think about the experience that you've had with your family.
Mm.
So, if I had 500 family members that I grew up with, like, I would hopefully not be in a broken state. I just couldn't understand how that could happen. And then when I went to Bella Coola and I met relatives and I started hearing some of her story as well as others, and I started putting the puzzle together and everything started to make sense. And I thought, you know what? This little girl was worth less. She was worth less all the other little girls. And when she actually finally had a small chance, a window of opportunity, when she started having her own children, being able to start a new life, a new beginning, new traditions with her own family, she couldn't even do that. We were taken away as well. Why? Because she was worth less. So I think about this lady and I think about everything she went through. And I think from a little girl to adulthood, she was worth less all the other girls. And that breaks my heart.
I'm so sorry. And I know that she passed away before you had the opportunity to meet her, and that's just so heartbreaking. In researching the 60 Scoop for this series and reading more about the residential schools and in Canada, it's absolutely abhorrent. I mean, the things that happened and were not just happening, but like government sanctioned and just horrendous. It's just such a horrible part of Canada's history, and I, I want people to learn about it because Miriam, your biological mother is a real person, and she represents so many people who had such a terrible time at the hands of our government and some very, very horrible people.
Yeah. And understanding, like, as a little girl, if we drove by Main and Hastings, I probably would have locked the car door.
Mm,
And my biological mother could have been on the other side of that door window. And that breaks my heart. It's just thinking that.
mm-hmm,
It's just, and thinking, seeing so many people still have judgment hats on. And my mom now, she has Alzheimer's, and explaining to her that I was joining the class action lawsuit at the beginning was a little bit tough for her. And then I explained, I really explained to her well, but now that she has Alzheimer's, it's interesting because she actually understands better now. And she said, "Sweetie, I understand. It wasn't us." And I said, "No, you didn't do anything wrong. You gave this child that needed a home with love. That wasn't that wasn't on you. It was prior to you. Why was my biological mother broken to begin with? Why couldn't she look after her kids?"
mm-hmm,
And just understanding that, because it's amazing how many people still, have wear judgment hats, and they really think that the colonization way was the right way. People still believe that. And it just amazes me that they think that their way is the right way. And they think, "Oh yeah, like, okay, so kill the Indian, wash the Indian out of the kid." Like, whatever it is, like, whatever those we think is ancient history books. Well, the last residential school closed in 96. That's not that ancient,
mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah, and the legacy of trauma and those things, like it. I don't know. I don't even have words for it. It's so upsetting, and I don't have a personal relationship or experience with that. Yeah, it's really quite shocking. You wrote about your personal story in a children's book. And, we're talking about some very difficult things here. Why did you decide to write 60 Scoop as a children's book?
Well, I think that, the schools are starting to include First Nations, Indigenous curriculums more and more. And now that there's dialogue being brought up about it, I think it's important that, we never had these stories when we were younger. We never knew anything about this. I didn't know until I was an adult that I was part of the 60s Scoop. So of course I understand that there's other adults that have never heard of it. I'm part of it and I didn't even realize until adulthood. And so it's interesting because I've had a lot of feedback from adults, of course, but recently I've been getting feedback from children, and that is just amazing. And children can handle the truth, and they can tell when you're telling them a story whether it's true.
Mm.
And what they get from it is a little bit different than what the adults get from it, but it's opening up dialogue, which I think is really important.
So I ordered your book, and I've read it a few times, and I've had it sitting on my coffee table, and I have two young boys, and my older is in grade 1 and he can read. And so he was picking it up, and I was telling him today, I said, "Oh yeah, I get to talk to Inez today. She's the one that wrote this book." And he said, "Oh, the book with he was so like overcome. was so moved by it. And I do think that I agree with you. I think that children understand what's true and what's not. And they do need to hear about some of the challenging things. How can we not repeat history if we don't understand what's happened?
Yeah, and all kids, it doesn't matter where they're from, they've all felt something. Like all kids have similar feelings at some time, in their life where they don't feel accepted or wanted or belonging or any of those things.
Mhm.
So me just kind of spelling it out, people kind of go, "Oh, hey, I'm not alone."
Yes.
They can relate to
Mhm.
different parts of the book.
Yes. And you write, as I said, some very challenging experiences in here. And then you also have, this really happy news of finding that you have a sister. And so there's, this hopeful part of reconnection, which you've experienced in your real life. And I found it so fascinating as you were talking through your story and how this search for culture took you like literally around the world. And it was back in BC where you sort of found yourself again. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Coming back to Canada and opening your restaurant, and can you pinpoint a moment where you finally could accept sort of both parts of you? Like, I'm Inez, I was adopted and I have this loving family, but I also had a history before that.
It was gradual, but after going to Bella Coola for the first time was the first time that I was super accepting about learning about it and and owning it.
Looking at this, as I said, there's kind of like these two parts of you, but how did you go from, you said, I'm going to repeat this line again. I knew I was Native, but I did not want to be, to I am Indigenous and this is a part of me and I want to accept that and also be that.
And I'm so proud.
Mm,
Now I'm so proud. And I'm so proud that guests can come into our restaurant and we get to showcase our heritage with pride.
mm,
All of us, and our whole team is Indigenous. And Remy's in the process of leaving the business. So it's going to be 100% First Nations owned and operated. It was interesting because when I started learning about, my biological mother and lots of the heartaches and the things, there's that has caused so many problems across our nation. Once I started learning about some of that and I started sharing it with my friends, my friends were like, "Oh my God, that's terrible." And oh my, like very, very dramatic about it,
mm,
as was I. But, I was gutted. But I would tell my First Nations friends and they would just look at me as if I was saying, like, "I think I'm going to have a tea instead of coffee today." They were just like looking at me, listening. And I looked at one of my friends and I snapped my finger and I went, I want to get there. How do I get there? And she said, Inez, it's simple because all of us have a story. And just remembering that every single person has a story. And when they're sharing it with you, listen to their story. It's not about judging. Leave the judgment hat off and listen to their story. And I'm there now, which is great. I've come full circle. And I think probably the next time that I heard some shocking news and I realized that I was listening like it was a story, I think that's when I realized, okay, I'm in it. I'm
mm,
here,
mm.
and that was a really amazing feeling. It was really fantastic.
So, can you talk to someone, an adoptee like yourself, who perhaps didn't really know the extent of the 60s scoop, maybe didn't really want to think about themselves as an Indigenous person? Can you talk to someone like that and just tell them what exploring this and embracing and being proud, like what that's done for you?
So my whole life not wanting to be who I was, and as an adult learning who I was and where I come from, knowledge is power. And that horrible feeling that you have in the pit of your stomach of not belonging or not feeling like, just feeling different is a horrible feeling. And learning about about yourself and learning about your heritage and your history, it's really, really, it's the most freeing feeling you can ever imagine. And the funny thing is that, now that I've been learning about it and I feel so good in my own skin, like it's the first time in my life I feel amazing in my own skin. And it's freedom, just feeling good in your own skin and owning that. And then people just celebrate that with you.
I love that saying, I feel amazing in my own skin.
I do.
Again, or we're doing the full circle thing. You're describing this picture of your family when everyone is fair and has blonde hair, and your skin is the different thing in the picture, to saying, I feel amazing this way. And
yeah,
this is me.
Yeah, well, I think kids don't like feeling different usually. They want to feel like they belong. And knowing where you come from is already a foot in the right direction on how to belong, because you need to belong in your own skin, right? That's probably the most important thing to really understand. And it didn't happen overnight. I'm not going to say that it did, because it didn't.
Yeah. I mean, this is like discovering who you are is sort of a lifelong process anyway. And then when you're an adoptee, there's just a whole extra layer on that, I think.
Once I really felt good in my own skin, I thought that all the other people that weren't adopted, I thought that's how they felt their whole life. I didn't realize that it's just human nature to have different questions. But I just thought, I finally feel good in my own skin. This is how every single person that wasn't adopted felt their entire life from birth. Oh my God.
So there's this thing that a lot of adopted people that listen to my show, we call coming out of the fog. And what that sort of means is it's when you finally realize the impact adoption has had on your life. And you come to the realization of kind of just that, like, oh, wait, other people don't think about this. Where did I come from? Or they just know.
And then another thing is going to Bella Coola and meeting 500 relatives. I mean, that's not even all of them. and like, then asking them, like, how are we related? And them saying, oh, I don't know, we have to check that. I was like, what do you mean you don't know? Like, I thought that they would all know everything too, and they don't.
Yeah, well, I guess when you have 500 relatives, it's sort of like, are you first cousin, second cousin, or all the things? Oh, good. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate chatting with you. Let's move now and we'll do our recommended resources. So this isn't probably going to be a surprise to anyone. I'm going to recommend that you pick up Inez's book called 60s Scoop. As I said, it's a children's book, but it is so profound in the matter-of-fact way that you share your story. And I really feel that adults also will be very moved reading your story in this fashion. And oh my gosh, the illustrations are really quite incredible, Inez. Where did you find your artist?
Yeah, well, he found me actually, Jason Eaglespeaker. Okay. He's the illustrator, and he also published it. And so he actually reached out to me and asked if I felt like sharing my story.
It's really beautiful, really, really beautiful. And also, I want to recommend that people go and visit your restaurant. And I come to Vancouver semi-regularly. So next time I'm there, I definitely want to come. I'm celiac, but I saw that you do gluten-free bannock. So
yes, and make sure you say that when you're reserved.
Okay, I will. I will.
If you're around on June 21st, that's National Indigenous Peoples Day, we have a fantastic evening set up. It's going to be filled with laughter and delicious food. So we have 2 comedians coming in. There's going to be 2 seatings, an early one and a late one. And I recommend that people come in and book for that.
Oh, it looks amazing. And I, researching you and everything, I saw that Salmon and Bannock is in the top 10 restaurants on TripAdvisor for all of Vancouver, which is like You guys, Vancouver is a huge city. Like there's thousands of restaurants. And your reviews, I was getting really hungry reading.
Awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're around in June, that sounds really great. Now, there's also another thing that you wanted to just give a little bit of advice, something that you didn't know when you were first kind of on this journey. But if you are a First Nations person, what's something that you didn't know that you know now, but people need to know?
Yeah, so I think the one thing that just shocked me the most is that I didn't know, being a First Nations person, that I could just call the New Hulk band office and say, "Hi, my name's Inez and my mother's name was Miriam. And do you know any information about us, or is she there?"
Mm.
I didn't know that I could do that
Mm-hmm.
and learn about it like from the beginning. I didn't know that.
So there's info available if you just ask, and you can just call the band office.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great.
And like when I called the band office for the first time, it was like the girl was like, "Oh, I'm your cousin."
Of course.
Of
Well,
course.
you have 500 relatives there, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I love that. That's so good. Okay, where can we connect with you online?
So I have, I'm on Instagram. I think my personal one. Well, if you check Inez Cook, it should come up. I think it's I'm Ice Guy.
Okay, I will link to your social media handles in the show notes. And what's your restaurant's website?
www.salmonandbannock.net.
And that's where you can make reservations,
Yes.
especially for the upcoming National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is that June 21st dinner and comedy that you were telling us about.
Yes.
That would be great. Okay. And if you go, I want to hear about it. So you got to message me and tell me how it was. I love stand up. So that's so good, and good food. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I'm just really so impressed by your story. And oh my gosh, I'm going back to now having that moment with your friend when you're 18 and you want to be a flight attendant and have your own restaurant, and you're living it.
I am living it. I'm actually going to London tonight.
Well, thank you so much for squeezing me in.
Yeah. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
I just want to let you know that Inez's book, 60s Scoop, is available on Amazon, and it's now available in both English and French. So make sure you go check that out. It's such a great resource and would be a welcome addition to especially your school library. If you have children of your own and you want to talk to them more about the 60s Scoop and educate them, I think this is a perfect resource for that. I just want to shift gears and say a giant thank you to everyone for listening. I so appreciate having the opportunity to be in your earbuds every week, helping you through your boredom of your commute or working out or walking the dog or whatever you're doing while you're listening. It is an honor, and I don't take it lightly. And I also want to say thank you to my monthly Patreon supporters. Without you, I wouldn't be able to keep doing the show regularly, and I'm just so honored that you support the show in this way. If you want to become a monthly partner, you can go to adopteeson.com/partner to find out more details and the added benefits of becoming a Patreon supporter. We have things like a secret Facebook group for adoptees only. And also there is a totally new Adoptees Off Script podcast. So if you're running out of Adoptees On episodes to binge, there is another whole podcast there waiting for you if you become a monthly supporter. Thanks for listening. Let's talk again next Friday.